So for the first time since starting my YouTube career, we actually have something new and exciting to talk about from Camp AMD, and that being obviously the new Zen architecture or Ryzen CPUs that I would assume you've all heard about by now. Now, of course, we've seen some launches in the past which are slight upgrades and tweaks to the existing Bulldozer architecture, but this is a new x86 architecture built from the ground up. So it is entirely new, which is kind of the best part about that. So obviously I have to do a build, and yeah, I haven't done an AMD like custom build in a very long time, so this should be good. But anyway, let's take a look here at what AMD actually sent over so you can kind of see what we're gonna be doing here. Now, you guys have seen this before already, I'm sure. Paul did a very good unboxing video on that. Here we have the 1800X, kind of need that. We've got some LPX memory here from Corsair. This is Vengeance 16 gigabyte or 2x8 gigabyte sticks of 3000 megahertz DDR4. And of course, we have the ASUS Crosshair 6 Hero. This is kind of near and dear to me because I started my channel on a Crosshair 5 formula from AMD with my 8320 CPU. So I kind of feel like we've gone full circle. Now, to keep things cool, they have sent over the Noctua NH-U12SE AM4 cooler. And what's cool about this is it actually has black fans. I mean, who would have thought black fans actually existed from Noctua? Check that out, there they are. Actually an all black fan, but this wouldn't be JayzTwoCents if I did air cooling. So as much as I appreciate the gesture, AMD, I'm just gonna kind of move that over there because I've got some plans for this. So without further ado, let's take a look at what I come up with. I look really tired and my eyes are really red and I'm squinting and stuff, guys, I spent 4 days building it. Actually, I only spent 2 days building this, but I spent 2 more days troubleshooting some of the issues that unfortunately arise with new platforms. Anyway, let's go and talk about what I built here. This is, of course, the Phanteks Enthoo Evolve with the tempered glass edition. So we've got glass on this thing. It looks fantastic. You're not seeing it in these pictures or these videos because they're just too reflective. But I took 2 of my GTX Titan X Maxwell cards, the ones that came out of Skunkworks. I put those in here as in SLI, and I didn't want to do that at first because I wanted to be able to easily swap out the cards on this, but I have a feeling the system is going to stay together because it turned out really freaking good. Now, of course, I've got the 1800X from AMD in there. I've got 16 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance LPX low profile memory and a very custom water loop in here. Now, before people start saying you can't run your loop that way, it's not gonna work because it's just gonna pass by. No, it works perfectly fine, guys. The flow splits itself between the blocks and the CPU. All the temperatures are perfectly within check. Well, with the exception of the CPU, I can't monitor temps on that. I think it turned out great. It really, really did. Of course, I've got the Vardar fans on there with the EK rads. I got a 240 in the front, a 45 mil 240 on the front, and a 30 mil 360 millimeter radiator on top. Now for power supply, I've got the Corsair RM850X. Some people thought that maybe the 850 might be a little bit low when I showed pictures of this on Instagram. But trust me when I say it's plenty, especially with the quite aggressive power efficiency, or quite aggressive AMD got with their power efficiency, especially with the 1800X, which is at 95 watts. So we've got more than enough power. Now, one of the reasons why this video took so long is being the Jay that I am, I decided I wanted to play around with overclocking, where I then somehow proceeded to brick one of my Crosshair 6 Hero motherboards. Still not entirely sure how that happened. It simply boot loops like crazy, and switching out the motherboard worked fine, CPU works fine. Something went weird and wonky with the BIOS in one of these boards. I've definitely been in communication with ASUS about this. They are going to be taking the board back and fully diagnosing it to see what went wrong, because that's of course how you make better BIOS and stuff. You find out what went wrong and you fix it. So I just happen to have a second board though by chance, and here we are now back up and running with it. So that meant I spent all night, Thursday night, tearing this apart, putting it back together, reinstalling the operating system, reinstalling games and all of that, which is why this video is so late. So I apologize for that, but anyway, here we are. Now with all the build stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the performance of these CPUs. Now I did not do a direct comparison between any Intel chips. I wanted to see what these things were capable of pretty much just on their own, because I don't care that AMD was comparing it to the 6900K. I really take all of that with a grain of salt, because even if the 6900K beats it, the argument is easily, well, it should. It's more than twice the price. But you are at least getting very, very comparable performance levels of the 6900K at half the price for highly multi-threaded applications, things like Cinebench and Blender and Handbrake, things that go, wow, we've got all these cores, let's leverage it. The problem is when you start talking about gaming, it's not quite so cut and dry. Fair warning moving forward regarding games though is I did not do a very in-depth dive in gaming because I spent a very long time and many hours just trying to deal with BIOS and stability issues. So unfortunately, a lot of my time that I had allocated to spend gaming the crap out of this system was spent just getting it to work. But I did use some of the titles I use when I do my GPU benchmarking, like Metro Last Light, Doom and Vulkan, Dirt Rally, which is very good at usually stressing a CPU, and of course synthetics like Firestrike and Heaven. Now they did very well. They did do very well. The problem is if you look at any other reviewer on the market, pretty much pick anyone who actually decided to compare these to something like a 7700K, the Intel offering at around $350 is still the IPC King, which is giving you better performance in 1080p gaming than these CPUs are. In fact, there's even online evidence of AMD getting their nose extremely out of joint with reviewers who decided to do 1080p testing. AMD believes that these CPUs are directly aimed at 1440p and 4K gamers. Now I'm gonna go ahead and call that out right now as a load of crap, because the more resolution you put into your game, the more you're offloading the load onto the GPUs and the CPU becomes less of a factor. 1080p gaming is a very relevant test to CPU overhead because your CPU is tasked with trying to keep up with the massive amount of frames being drawn by your graphics cards. In fact, if you go look at the Steam hardware analytics, you will find that 1080p gaming is still extremely dominant. So that's why we do 1080p gaming. It is talking directly to the majority. But then again, it's also very fair to call me out and say, Jay, most people with a 1080p panel wouldn't be running dual Titan X Maxwell cards. And with that, I would say you're absolutely right. But this was a good way to see just how far we could push the FPS before the CPU really starts to become a factor. Now, 1080p gaming on the 1800X was pretty freakishly smooth, I have to admit. Even though I'm throwing a crap ton of frames at it, it seemed to keep up pretty well. In fact, if I didn't have an FPS counter up in the corner, I would have absolutely no idea what the frames were running at because it was very, very high. But frame pacing also seemed to be improved a little bit over like some of the testing I've done on i5 and i7 7700K stuff recently with the KB Lake launch. I would have no problems recommending this CPU to someone running 1080p gaming. In fact, the only weird anomaly I really experienced though while gaming was while running Doom with the Vulkan API at 4K on ultra settings, where I experienced an extreme amount of input lag. In fact, enough to where I even engaged slow-mo on my camera to kind of try and see just how bad it was. You guys can see here, it was pretty unplayable. But yeah, that was, I can't really explain that one. When I would bring it down to 1080p or 1440p, it was perfectly fine with no lag whatsoever. Now that kind of brings me to the recommendation side of this video. Jay, do you recommend AMD Ryzen? I'm gonna tell you this. This is by far though the most compelling argument that we've seen from AMD regarding CPUs in a very long time. My problem regarding recommending it right now has nothing to do with the actual architecture of the chip itself. It has to do with these guys right here. AMD didn't give a lot of lead time for the manufacturers of motherboards to be able to refine and optimize the BIOS. And there's also some optimization that needs to take place inside the operating system, and God knows there's some level of optimization that needs to take place in terms of the game developers. Perfect example is the Heaven benchmark, where running it on Ryzen, CPU 1 was usually pegged at 100% usage, guaranteed to be above 90, but like I said, sometimes hitting 100. Now I thought that was kind of strange because I've recently done some Heaven benchmarks where I noticed that it was the hyper-threaded cores that were kind of sitting idle, but the rest of the cores were actually splitting the load between them. So that kind of prompted me to fire up my Intel system, which is going right behind me right here, and do the exact same test. And again, like I expected, the utilization was being spread out across the cores themselves. Again, with hyper-threading kind of not doing anything, but we saw a much more balanced load. So that obviously means we need to wait for some optimizations to happen. Now I did play around with the affinity. It made no difference whatsoever with the Ryzen CPU. It's still pegged out number one, and then the load just fell off hardcore as it went down the core stack. So my recommendation to the people asking me, should you buy Ryzen or wait, is this. If you are going to buy Ryzen, you are also buying into cutting edge, bleeding edge technology, which unfortunately is usually pretty painful as you're waiting for optimizations and updates to come about. You would also be buying into probably some level of headaches, and if you're buying it specifically hoping to get amazing overclocking performance, I've got bad news for you. Overclocking on these things is very, very, very disappointing. It's average about 300 megahertz overclock. I ran all of these tests at 3.9 gigahertz, and some folks are hitting 4 gigs, and it's like the top 1% are hitting 4.1. Now, silicon manufacturing quality can improve over time, which might help some of the overclocks, but again, time is gonna tell. But if you are someone that wants to buy it and have 100% stability up front, then you might want to hold off just a little bit. And I'm not saying hold off by not buying it and going with Intel. I'm saying hold off and wait until we see some maturity on the software side of things with BIOS and operating system and game optimizations. This is brand new architecture, guys. This has never been seen before, including by the developers and even by some of the manufacturers of the motherboards. Anyway, there's my video regarding Ryzen. I take it for what it is. I don't feel like it was deep enough, but I didn't get to spend a lot of time doing the testing I wanted. I spent a lot of time trying to get the damn thing to work, which is why my recommendation regarding waiting for maturity on the software side of things is probably gonna be my stance on this for a while. Of course, I will be doing 1700X and 1700 testing as well. The 1700 is by far, I think, the real interesting one in all of this because it's so much cheaper. But I'm more interested in seeing what 3 and 5 have to bring. Anyway, guys, tell me what you thought of this video. Like if you liked it, guys. I put so much ridiculous time into this video. This crazy build was simply because I felt you guys deserved seeing a crazy AMD build. I think it turned out pretty damn well. Anyway, follow me over on Twitter. If you want to tell me, Jay, you suck, you should never review another CPU again, I'd probably take that statement and run with it because it's just sometimes such a headache. Anyway, I'm gonna go to sleep now, guys. Thanks for watching this video. As always, I will see you in the next one.